During the presidential campaign, Donald Trump vowed to protect women, quote, whether the women like it or not. He really said this. He really said this. And, I'm just wondering, because if protecting women is the goal, one could start with ensuring, everyone has a safe place to work, free of harassment, free of abuse. That includes the United States military. Well, last night, Donald Trump's embattled choice for Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth, he joined the president-elect and the vice president-elect at the Army-Navy football game. Now, Donald Trump's pick to lead the Pentagon faces allegations including excessive drinking, financial mismanagement, and one of sexual assault. Hegseth denies any wrongdoing, but he paid the woman who accused him of sexual assault to keep quiet under a non-disclosure agreement. Hegseth was never charged and maintains the encounter was consensual. Joining us now to discuss is journalist Gretchen Carlson and Democratic strategist Julie Roginski. They are both co-founders of Lift Our Voices, a nonprofit focused on combating sexual misconduct in the workplace. Before we get started, because I think Michael has the first question for you guys, I do just want to note that sans the financial mismanagement and the very real sexual assault allegations and the drinking, Pete Hegseth is unqualified. Like his qualifications to be my opinion, to be the defense secretary is that he was a veteran. He is a veteran, and thank you for your service. But that does not mean that he's never run a large organization. So on top of all of that, we have these very concerning allegations, and I'm flabbergasted. So I'm glad you all are here to discuss it all.
It's great to have you both here. And Gretchen, it's good to see you. It's been a long, long time since my days back at Fox,
Michael.
where we worked together. It's so good to see you. Welcome. I really want to get into the meat of what both of you are doing, because I think it's profoundly important in this space. The Washington Post, noting on Hegseth's disclosure, states sometimes after the incident, the woman and her husband hired a lawyer to ensure Hegseth didn't get off without punishment, according to the memo sent to the transition team. Hegseth's lawyers proposed they sign a non-disclosure agreement, the details of which have not been made public, the memo said. The agreement was signed about 2.5 years after the alleged assault, Hegseth's lawyer said. The point here is to get this non-disclosure agreement in place. And then he can talk about it. And he can say whatever. He can sit there and deny, oh, no, I don't know what you're talking about. This is not. And she, on the other hand, is not in a position, because she signed the damn thing, to say anything. Talk about the impact of these non-disclosure agreements in the workplace, and even post a working relationship with something occurred in years later. The woman finally has the courage and the state of mind to actually talk publicly and call out the behavior. And then the settlement around this non-disclosure then really cuts off any further discussion and exposure for the person who's allegedly involved in that bad behavior.
Yeah, Michael, Simone, great to see you again on this Sunday morning. So usually non-disclosure agreements go both ways. And I believe in this circumstance they did. What Pete Hegseth's lawyer is now alleging is that the survivor in this situation, alleged survivor, that she broke the non-disclosure agreement by sending information to the Trump transition team. However, it was not her who sent that information. It was a friend of hers. And so in my mind, she has not broken this non-disclosure agreement. She's been in hiding in California ever since this all became public. To my knowledge, she has said absolutely nothing about this. But to your point, what happened then was that Hegseth and his lawyer, because they believed or said that she had broken the non-disclosure, they then said, well, then we can go out and talk. And so they went out and said that she was trying to extort them, and that what she said was all lies, and that, in fact, she was now let out of her non-disclosure agreement. They said that 10 days ago, but that was news, I think, to everyone on her side. But if she did then go say anything because she was out of the NDA, they would be sure to sue her for defamation along with her lawyer and her friend. To which Senator Blumenthal, who was on that program right afterwards, said that that is an intimidation of a witness. So this is sort of the standard way of what happens to survivors. You sign these non-disclosures, you're scared to death to say a word, then you're apparently let out of them, which almost never happens. But then the lawyer in the same breath says, but if you talk, we'll sue you into oblivion. And so, you know, that I did also take as a threat, but it's very commonplace. Julie and I have seen this often since our stories 8.5 years ago. And that's why we fight as an organization to get rid of these non-disclosures, because they never get to the truth.
You know, let's talk about your organization. And before, can we put the picture back up on the screen of Pete Hegseth, Donald Trump, and J.D. Vance, the president-elect and the vice president-elect, with Pete Hegseth at the Army-Navy game? Because this photo, when I first saw it, I thought about the woman that is at the center of the story, whose name we do not know right at this point and is not publicly known, but this is a show of support from the president-elect. Pete Hegseth is embattled, but it looks Donald Trump is throwing all of his support behind him. And you got Tulsi Gabbard back there, the Speaker of the House, Mike Johnson, as well as in that box. I think I saw Elon Musk behind them as well. This is this does not make any I don't think this makes people want to say, okay, come forward, do any more. Like, this is also a show of you can say what you want, but the president-elect is standing with this person. Your organization, talk about your corporate scorecard. Axios wrote about this. Your advocacy group is launching a new corporate scorecard to shine a light on the secretive practices companies use to silence workers about sexual harassment and discrimination. So the idea behind the Lift Our Voices scorecard system is to track employers' use of NDAs, enforce arbitration, similar to how other surveys examine benefits like health insurance or paid leave. I think what you're doing is really important, and we need to talk more about it, because I'm looking at Pete Hegseth, and it is giving me flashbacks of Brett Kavanaugh.
Well, thank you so much for mentioning the corporate scorecard, because it is important for employees to know whether their companies or prospective companies are intending to silence them from the first day of work. And more than a third of all American workers are bound by NDAs. Over 80% of all American workers are bound by forced arbitration. And these are silencing mechanisms that effectively prevent people from coming forward in the daylight and sharing their stories with anybody. And by anybody, I mean their spouses or their parents or their children or their priest or their rabbi or their psychiatrist or anybody, which just goes to show how extensive the epidemic of silencing is in the American workplace, and something that I think more people should know about and be aware of before they take a job, so that they know whether their employees are silencing them. As for Pete Hegseth, you know, Gretchen and I worked very hard to pass the Speak Out Act, which is a law to ban pre-dispute NDAs for sexual misconduct like sexual harassment and sexual assault. And it was a groundbreaking law, the first time the federal government really put a marker down saying that NDAs are not appropriate. And it's frustrating for us, I think, to see a lot of the very same senators with whom we worked on both sides of the aisle. This passed unanimously in the Senate. It passed overwhelmingly in the House with a lot of Republican support. To see the very people who we stood up at press conferences with, who spoke very clearly about the need to end the silencing of women who've been sexually assaulted and harassed, now kind of say, well, you know, except for Pete Hegseth, that NDA is okay. And I was very taken aback by seeing Senator Rick Scott, who, again, was somebody who supported our law, saying that she should be continued to be bound by her NDA. And when asked about why she wasn't able to come forward, he said, well, we haven't heard from her. This is all rumor and innuendo. And a journalist asked him, well, if that's the case, would you support her coming forward? Well, no, she has an NDA. I mean, none of this makes any sense. And these senators and these members of the House, but certainly the senators who will be voting for Pete Hegseth, they know better. They know better because we spoke to them. And we know where they stand in these issues with their own votes. And yet, for some reason, when it comes to the president-elect's selections of not just Pete Hegseth, but other people who've engaged in sexual misconduct coming into his administration, they just will not stand up. And it's very disappointing. And I hope they actually listen and change their minds in the course of the next coming months.
Gretchen, that raises, as we, try to figure out how to move forward here, it does raise, I think, a very important question, not just on the corporate side of your scorecard, right? But also on the political side, the men and women who in elected office, yes, say one thing but then do another. And how does your organization look to hold folks accountable in the political space as well? Because that's, in my estimation, a lot of where the energy for this really gets ratcheted up, because you have political leaders just sort of going, no, what? Pete's good. Pete's good. But wait a minute. He's got all these sexual allegations and offenses and an NDA. I mean, all this stuff says maybe there's something else here, and yet they seemingly want to look past that. So it seems a little bit of a bifurcation that I think probably should be corrected. What do you think?
How about disingenuous? I mean, this is why America is apathetic about politicians, right? I mean, it's been going on for centuries that they don't do what they say. But I think one of the things, you have a lot of a confluence of events happening here. You have President Trump coming in, having more power over elected officials than maybe any other president in the history of our nation, as far as them just falling in line, right? And one thing that I noticed over the last week is that the big talking point on the Republican side was that suddenly we're not going to believe anonymous sources. Well, that was news to me as a journalist, and to both of you and to Julie as well, because the bedrock of journalism is anonymous sources. So suddenly we're not going to believe them. Now they're saying that, all these anonymous sources that were talking about his behavior at Fox News, the anonymous sources that said they've been sexually harassed by him, this woman who says she was sexually assaulted by him, unless they put a name and a face to it, we don't believe them anymore. That's not the way this system works in journalism or with sexual assault. Why do we call people Jane Does? We do that on purpose because there is an intense fear of coming forward. And do you want to have the MAGA right coming after you if you come forward? Why is this woman in hiding? Look what happened to Christine Blasey Ford. I mean, it ain't fun to come forward. But I think what is so disappointing to Julie and I in this discussion is that the MAGA talking point in the last week has been, we no longer believe anonymous sources. And it was very interesting to me because during this whole shooter situation of United Healthcare over the last couple of weeks, there have been tons of anonymous sources from his fraternity, from people who knew him. And why didn't they want to put their name and face on it? Because they didn't want to get involved and because they were scared. Doesn't mean that what they said was not true. So I think it's a confluence of a lot of things happening here, but the number one thing is that our elected officials are scared of what will happen to them with blowback from Donald Trump and his supporters. And that is shameful.
That is shameful.